So,
Okay, well, good morning, everybody. My name's Beth Neal, and I'm a professor of social work at the University of East Anglia in Norwich. I'm really pleased to be here today to sort of fly the flag for the other group of key workers, social workers, and to talk about this issue of how children have been enabled to keep in touch with their birth families, children in care. I'm going to be presenting today with Vicky Metherington, who's a senior manager in North Yorkshire County Council. So I'm going to start and talk about some research that we carried out during the first period of lockdown. And then Vicky's going to follow and kind of continue the story about what's happened since then in her local authority and how they've been able to try and reopen contact for children in care.
Right.
So I want to start with just a kind of a framework, just to say a little bit about children in care and family time. Now, we've chosen to use the word family time today to try and emphasize that these are family meetings. You know, the purpose of children who are in care, seeing their birth family, is to be able to continue those relationships, to enjoy spending time with their parents, or siblings or other relatives. Is also about their identity. So, you know, there's a large number of children in care of all ages. Some of them are in temporary care and will be, you know, maybe heading to go back home. Some children are in long-term care. So children's plans will differ, their contact plans will differ, but most children in care will have a plan to have some kind of face-to-face family time with people in their birth family. Now, we know that that works best where children, when they're in their foster family or their residential home or their kinship care placement, can feel part of that unit, that family unit that they're in, but also feel connected to their birth family. That's what seems to be healthiest for children. Taking an individual approach is really important because what every child needs is different. And whether this family time meetings works really depends on the relationships between everybody involved. You know, what's the relationship like between the child and the parents? What's the relationship like between the foster carers and the parents? And we know that because of the complex needs that children and their birth families have, that some of these family time meetings do need to be supported. So we need to put in the right support depending on what the family needs. So that's kind of what we know about family time generally. So I'm going to talk about this research that was funded by the Nuffield Family Justice Observatory, and we carried it out in April and May, so when the lockdown first began. And it links to a range of projects that the observatory are funding because they're making children's family time a spotlight issue. And our questions were, you know, once that lockdown started, what contact was happening for children in care, also living with relatives and adopted children? And particularly, you know, we knew that people were going to be using digital methods, so we wanted to know how that was working and what were the benefits and what were the difficulties of using digital contact. So we collected information through telephone interviews, mostly with professionals, but we also had an online survey and we got a wider group of people who told us about their situation here, including foster carers, more professionals, kinship carers, birth relatives, adoptive parents. We didn't make it open to young people, but one young person did fill in the survey. Now, the government guidance around children in care was not really clear. They kind of said, well, we expect that arrangements will be made to keep children in touch with their families, but it was kind of a bit vague about what that might look like. I think the guidance said something like, we anticipate this will mostly be virtual. Now, there was clearer guidance for children whose parents, you know, were divorced or separated, that the child moving between the two households was acceptable, given the kind of very strict lockdown arrangements at that point in time. But that same guidance wasn't given for children in care. So what were people doing? Well, pretty much that quote at the top of the slide sums it up, that face-to-face has been cancelled until further notice, somebody wrote. And that's pretty much what everybody said, that it kind of stopped, you know, more or less straight away on the 23rd of March. So in the place of meetings, which might previously had taken place in the birth family home, in the foster home, in the care home, or in a contact centre, video calls were very widely used as an alternative to face-to-face family time. Sometimes these were mediated. The social worker would be sitting in on the call, or contact centres took up that work and did that mediation. Sometimes it was unmediated, or it was left to foster carers to arrange things. Some people were just using kind of video calling, much as adults might use it, but very rapidly people were learning that the format needed to be adapted for children, particularly small children. So there was lots of fabulous work developed around making these calls more activity or play based, so it's more fun and engaging for children. Sometimes the calls mirrored the pattern of family time meetings. So if the family time was once a week on a Saturday morning, the calls might be once a week on a Saturday morning. But other people went for more, maybe of a little and often model, with maybe a few small calls during the week, rather than trying to sustain a video call for an hour or 2 hours, which is what the face-to-face meeting might have been. We didn't see the video calling used much in adoption, because typically most adopted children don't have this face-to-face family time with their parents. Some do with their brothers or sisters, and in those cases, the video calls tended to be put in place. Some people were also using just good old-fashioned phone calls and messaging, particularly teenagers who had their own phone. Some of them might have been doing their own thing anyway before the pandemic. Some carers, foster carers or kinship carers, were using their smartphones to send extra pictures to the parents, or little videos of, particularly of small children, to kind of fill the gap for parents who were missing out on actually seeing their children in the flesh. There was some concerns about sharing numbers for some carers, so they weren't too happy about doing that, or they wanted a different number or a new SIM card. Now, there were some very few exceptions to this cancellation of face-to-face family time. They were very rare. So people talked about very particular situations, like teenagers who were so desperate to see their family that the social worker felt, well, if I try and stop this, they're going to do it anyway, so we might as well support them and try and advise them about social distancing and hygiene and doing it safely. So it was when there was this compelling need. Another example was a very young child who, a toddler who'd recently came into care and was really missing their parent. So, I think a meetup was arranged in the park so the foster carer could meet with the mum and they could walk the child around the park together. Some people were trying to make these face-to-face meetings socially distant, which is interesting with small children. So I want to focus on some of the experiences of children, carers and parents looked at separately, and the pros and cons of these video methods of keeping in touch. So with the children, obviously the main benefit was really essentially it was better than nothing. It's a reasonable alternative under the circumstances. At least the child got to see their mum and dad or their brothers and sisters, and that was really kind of better than nothing. Now, exactly how each child responded depended very much on their age, their individual needs, their previous experiences, and the nature of their relationship with their parents. So some children were really said to really enjoy and love these video calls, particularly when their relationship with their parents was good. Other children seem to get less benefit out of it. So babies in particular, everybody emphasised it's really hard for a baby to know what on earth is going on just talking to their parent on a screen. It's not really an adequate substitute for very young children. So, and even children who could kind of recognize that was their mum or dad on the screen would be very quickly bored, particularly if, you know, the parent was just trying to talk to them. The parent could maybe hold their attention for longer if they were singing a song or playing a game. So it could be very confusing and not very effective for babies. A lot of people said that teenagers actually quite enjoyed it because for them it's more a familiar means of communication. Some children were said to really miss that sensory experience of being able to touch and cuddle and sit on their parents' lap. So that's a major limitation. You cannot achieve that kind of sensory connection through a video call. For children with disabilities, it was maybe difficult for some. They couldn't really compute what was happening on the screen. It was a difficult way for them to participate. But other children with disabilities were said to really enjoy seeing their parents on the screen. Now, where children had a difficult relationship with their parents, you know, maybe where they'd been abused and neglected and they were quite fearful of their parents, there was quite mixed reactions. So some children were said to feel, you know, maybe where they'd previously seen their parent in a contact centre, it felt like a safe space for them. Actually, having their parents in their foster home on the video call could feel unsafe and they didn't like it. But for other children, the switch from seeing their parents face to face, which maybe was quite emotionally difficult for them, they felt a bit relieved to have that distance and to see them on the video screen. So I think it shone a bit of a light on maybe some things that were not quite right about some of the face-to-face family time. One benefit for children that some people identified was that because foster carers were in the main taking on this role of, you know, making the call to the parents and facilitating these video calls, that it gave a bit of time and space for the parent and the foster parent to connect and talk and see a little bit of each other's worlds, and that could be better for children to have these two worlds that they exist in a little bit more integrated. Some people said that for children, they weren't having to spend a lot of time traveling, maybe disappointed if their parents didn't show up, so they made base more at home. They had more time for bonding with their foster carers, and that could be a good thing. And really, overall, people emphasise how quickly they'd learned about the need to be really creative and fun and playful to make this a rewarding experience for children and their families. So turning now to the carers, the move to facilitating digital contact did create increased demands and responsibilities for foster carers, and some, you know, adapted really quickly to that and really positively, but others were struggling. Particularly think about foster carers who suddenly they've got all the children at home all day because the schools are shut. They've got children from, you know, different children from different birth families who have different contact arrangements, and suddenly they're overwhelmed with demands of making all these video calls. And it might be something that they weren't very familiar with video calls themselves. I mean, probably in even February of this year, most of us didn't know what Zoom was, didn't know what Microsoft Teams are. Now it's an everyday part of our lives. So it was a steep learning curve for a lot of foster carers, as it was for social workers. But most carers were really focused on just trying to do the right thing for the child. Some people did feel they had, you know, they needed a bit more help, particularly around using the technology, managing privacy settings and confidentiality, managing difficult situations that might crop up, like a birth parent becoming upset on the call. And they wanted a bit more guidance, particularly kinship carers who where maybe the child had left care and was on a special guardianship order. They felt a little bit forgotten. And some foster carers did emphasise that it was quite positive to have this chance to kind of talk to parents directly and maybe see a little bit of their world. I mentioned some of the concerns about confidentiality and managing risks that some carers had. Some people really liked having a bit more control and even wanted to do more, but felt that professionals got in the way. This was true sometimes for adoptive parents who, their child couldn't see their brothers and sisters, and they kind of thought, well, why can't I just ring up the other adoptive parents or just call them? But professionals were like, no, don't do that. A bit risk averse culture around adoption tended to be. Carers talked about needing to manage children's reactions, and that could be an extra effort for them. And, they talked about having to do all this in the general stress of the pandemic, maybe worries about their own health. This is a really significant issue because a lot of foster carers are older. Some have underlying health problems. Some are caring for children with disabilities or underlying health problems. Kinship carers, grandparents looking after their grandchildren, are often older. So the concerns about the virus were very real and significant for a lot of these carers. And that's why it's so important, when Vicky talks about how they've opened up face-to-face contact, that a careful approach was taken. So we heard from some parents as well, and they emphasised the increased worry they had about their children, that, parents whose children are in care tend to worry about them anyway because they can't see them from day to day. And that worry was emphasised by the worry about the virus. Are they okay? Are their foster carers sick? What's going to happen next? When will I see them again? A lot of parents were understanding and accepting of the need for the contact to stop because they could see that everybody was in the same boat. Everybody was cut off from their families. But some people were angry and frustrated. Parents were generally really pleased to see their children on calls, but they did miss the physical touch. They wanted to hold their children and cuddle their children. And a big problem for some parents was actually they just didn't have the technology, or they might have a smartphone, but they've not got no credit on it, and they haven't got broadband where they're living. So they needed help to actually get online. So just to kind of what were our conclusions from the study, really? Well, what struck me, having been researching children's family time for over 20 years, is that kind of what was underpinning good quality experiences on the digital calls was the same as what underpins good quality contact where families are meeting in person. It's about keeping children's individual needs at the centre of planning. So thinking, is this a child who's really enjoying these calls, or are they not? Keeping that individual focus on the child rather than saying, this is what we're doing for all kids in our agency. It is about taking into account those needs of the adults. Can the birth parent get on the call? Does the foster carer need some help and support with this? It is about looking for opportunities to build trust between the two parts of the child's world so that they feel their life is more integrated. So, when kids are not enjoying calls, birth parents and foster carers working together to think what could be fun. Foster carers know what children enjoy and can give parents lots of ideas about, why don't you do this? Why don't you try that? So that working together is important. Managing risks proportionally is important. So, rather than tell all foster carers, don't use your own phone, don't let the parents have your number, don't show anything in the background of your house, only apply those risk controls where they're warranted. Otherwise, there's a risk that these calls are made very stifled. And overall, aim for this family time to be a fun, rewarding experience for children and their families. So that's me. I just want to check everybody's hearing okay, because I'm hearing nothing. It's like I'm just talking to nobody, but hopefully somebody will shout if there's any problems. It's all going okay. I'll hand over to Vicky then. So Vicky, if you just boss me about when you want me to move your slides on.
Yeah, okay. Well, I'm just going to talk through them really. So, hi everyone. Yeah, as Beth said, I'm Vicky Metherington, one of the heads of service in North Yorkshire County Council, and I have responsibility for the looked after children, leaving care and youth justice service. So this presentation really is just to talk a little bit about family time. We call contact in North Yorkshire family time from lockdown to date. Okay, Beth. Oh, it's whizzy. Okay, so when the government issued lockdown measures back in March 2020, as Beth alluded to, we know that family time sessions had to cease. And that was a really difficult thing for all of us in North Yorkshire. We spent some time writing letters to parents to explain what was happening. And we had conversations with foster carers and children where they could understand in relation to what changes were going to be made. We immediately created what was called an emergency planning group, and that emergency planning group has met every day on a daily basis since March 23rd. It reduced slightly, and we called it the recovery planning group back in the summertime, because we thought we were moving into a recovery, and it's now been renamed PMG. And for the life of me, I can't think what Pandemic Management Group. So that group met on a daily basis to consider a range of complex issues in relation to how we deliver social care services. But one of the things that we really considered from the very beginning was looking at how we could consider an alternative form of delivery of family time, and we created a family time working group and brought together reps from a number of teams within the service across safeguarding, looked after children, fostering and early help, to develop a virtual family time offer. Hey, Beth.
Oh, I think you said that.
just to, yeah, okay. Just, yeah. Click again, I think, Beth. I think the. So in terms of, between March and June, we religiously made sure that children in our care were able to see their family through a range of virtual means and methods that Beth's already talked about, using WhatsApp, FaceTime, a range of different opportunities. And it was clear that children were actually benefiting from some of those alternative arrangements. Actually, what we learned was that teenage children were kind of quite preferring to speak to their parents in a more natural way. And that went well, but by June, we felt that we couldn't wait any longer, that it just felt to us so wrong that children weren't seeing their family. And we pulled together a group to try to look at how we could reinstate face-to-face family time. There's a quote in here which talks about, in a crisis, everyone recognises the need to stay in touch with the people they care about. Keeping connected with loved ones is particularly important for children who've already experienced disruptive relationships. Their feelings of loss and rejection are already likely to be heightened, and maintaining family links is important for helping children cope with separation, loss and identity issues. We also felt there was a balance that was needed to identify between the safety and well-being of the children and the safety and possible anxiety of foster carers and birth parents due to the risks of the COVID-19 virus. There was a balance to be struck as we started to think about how we could reinstate family time, because we had foster carers that were shielding and it wasn't going to be easy. Next slide, Beth. So, can you just go back, Beth, because you missed the last bit of my slide. Oh. They come in. So there's a last point there that just talks about, with this in mind, I've already spoken about a family time group was formed with the sole aim of trying to reinstate family time in a safe and phased manner. Okay. And then I think it'll come up with a number of different points. I'll wait till they're all in.
Oh,
I think that.
There we are.
Okay, so the family time working group then really came together beginning of June. I've already talked about it was a multifaceted group. It involved practitioners. We needed business support services. We had property services. We had Public Health England in there and senior health and safety advisors, because don't forget, we haven't had any buildings open. We'd had nothing in place. So we had a massive task ahead of us to look at how we could help children to see their families, where they could see them, and making sure that everything that we did was done in a COVID safe approach, so that everybody was comfortable and confident with our approach, because staff understandably were going to be very nervous about reinstating family time. We needed to make sure that our union was satisfied with our approach. It was a really complex situation. Next slide. It would be easier if they didn't all come in like this, wouldn't it?
Yeah.
So the Family Time Working Group, I think there might be another point missing off there. Family Time Working Group timeline and tasks then. So we created some clear terms of reference and membership, and we agreed that family time would be reinstated in a 3-phased approach, phase 1, 2 and 3. And we would be looking at how we could have a blended approach with a mix of face-to-face and virtual. There was no way we were going to be able to get back up and running with the amount of family time that we were used to doing because of the volume of buildings, etc. So in terms of communication, we wrote to families and foster carers. We developed a 1-minute guide so that everybody was clear about what we were trying to establish. We developed some words and pictures, which I'll talk to you a little bit about. Words and pictures is a tool that is used in Signs of Safety, and Signs of Safety is North Yorkshire's practice model, and it's an approach that allows us to use pictures and words to help children to understand, rather than using language that's full of jargon. We facilitated question and answer sessions virtually for managers and staff involved in the delivery, and we met with Unison on a number of occasions. We also had to look at how we could get venues up and ready for the delivery of family time. So we had a buildings matrix developed, which identified which buildings could be prepared across our county. North Yorkshire's enormous. It's rural in some areas, and in other areas it's got a high population, but it's a massive geographical area that did have 5 CCGs until recently and 7 district councils. So you can imagine the complexity of trying to get this up and running. And we created a family time working protocol and a risk assessment. Okay. And we also made sure that we had in place a very clear approach as to how PPE could be used by staff. Using a risk assessment process, we didn't say to everybody, you go out and you use PPE. We developed a very clear approach so that people were clear when they needed to use that. Okay. So phase 1 of our reinstating of family time, we agreed that we were going to focus this on children aged under 4, obvious reasons, because those children hadn't seen their families and it was really difficult to see the benefits that they were having from the virtual sessions. We identified those children to be the main cohort, and we developed a clear flow chart to ensure that there was a safe process in place, enabling key decisions to be made, and a scaling questionnaire was formulated to assist in identifying which children would be seeing their families in phase 1. Okay. So phase 1 didn't cover all situations. We recognised that unplanned additions to phase 1 included a child aged 4 where video telephone interaction using technology hadn't been successful and the quality of contact wasn't good and the child was showing high levels of distress. And secondly, we where there was a child aged 4 and above where the care plan for them was reunification home to parents, we agreed that those children also should be included in phase 1 so that we could plan the trajectory and try to ensure we didn't delay a return home for those children. And there were also children aged 4 under 4 where reinstating face-to-face family time as part of phase 1 wasn't suitable, and that was where a child under 4 had a specific health issue, or the foster carer was extremely vulnerable and they were shielding, or where that child had an older sibling that was living in a different household back in June that was felt to be too risky. So those children were considered for phase 2. And as I'm talking about this, it takes me back to just how detailed these discussions were to make sure that we got this as right as we could. So we agreed that we use a signs of safety scaling question to aid discussions with all involved. And our scaling question was this: on a scale of 0 to 10, in terms of considering the child having face-to-face family time with their family right now, where would you rate the safety of this and the possibility of it going ahead? 10 would be where the child has a really good understanding of what's going to happen when they see their family. The parents and the foster carers are comfortable and confident with the arrangements, and everyone is happy for face-to-face family time to resume. And 0 is where, although the family and the foster carers know that it's really critical that the child sees their family, everyone's really anxious and worried about catching the virus and don't want it to go ahead at this time. And that was used to help us to have the discussions that we needed to do with some carers and to try to move that family time arrangement on. And we couldn't take a blanket approach to this. It really did have to be on a kind of individual child's basis, really, which involved huge discussions with the social workers, with the workers that facilitated family time, and foster carers. Okay, Beth, there's some stuff that needs to get in there. So the words and pictures was used to help the child to understand the steps to take during family time to keep everyone safe and well. For example, reminding people to hand wash and to use social distancing. So this is just one example that was used. So Alicia lives with a foster carer, Joe. Every Tuesday and Friday, Alicia used to visit her mummy and daddy, but now she can only speak to them on the phone instead because of a virus. Some people call the virus COVID-19. It's like a bad cold, but it can move from one person to another quickly and leave people very poorly. And this is why, Alicia, you couldn't see your mummy and daddy face to face. Joe said that it's okay for Alicia to see her mummy and daddy face to face next week, as long as she's very careful and she washes her hands. Alicia must also wash her hands when she comes home. Alicia is really excited about seeing her mummy and daddy and understands that they all have to be very careful. You can see that every social worker would develop a different words and pictures for each individual child to help with that understanding, rather than using narrative that nobody gets, really. Okay. So I talked about a blended approach, and we really are back into a blended approach, but this was around having a mix of face-to-face and virtual, a way to enhance the time a child spends with a family and connected network. So we advocated that children would have one face-to-face session per week, with additional sessions provided via a virtual platform. If replacing face-to-face sessions with virtual sessions, the latter would in most circumstances be more frequent to compensate for the likelihood of the reduced length of contact. And our message to social workers was this: that we recognise that each child's circumstances and needs are different, but we must always aspire to meet the best possible needs for that child. If there are exceptional circumstances, these must always be discussed with the child's social worker and considered on a case-by-case basis. Okay.
Oh,
so
too far.
Phases 2 and 3, the next step. So phases 2 and 3, we built on phase 1. Phase one really established confidence in practice across the workforce, and we had a couple of service days, and it was just absolutely amazing to hear some of the stories from workers that, you know, talked about what it was like when they first enabled the child they'd been working with to see their parent. It was lovely to see. So phase 2 was around older children and young people, and phase 3 was around how we could facilitate family time for all the other groups, for example, large groups of siblings, children where carers or children had previously been shielded. And we were continuously and are continuously making sure that our family time protocol and risk assessments are updated to take into account government guidance and where we are in terms of postcode. We facilitated further question and answer sessions, which we invited the union to as well, actually, because workers were going to the union to talk about worries. Well, actually, in having a really open question and answer session, we could be visible, workers could ask us anything and we could have a really good response to them, and they felt listened to, which was really important for us. We didn't want them to feel that we were doing to them. We wanted an open approach to how family time was being facilitated, and regular communication with families and foster carers throughout the process. Okay. So this was Jay's story. The best part of family time was getting to cuddle mum. I really enjoyed seeing you, mum, and I can't wait for next Monday to see you again. As I say that, I'm well up. Family time's been a very positive experience for myself, and I felt safe throughout. That's from one of the workers, which was amazing, because believe me, when we first started having conversations about this, you can imagine how nervous people were, listening to the media around the death rate rising, and we were talking about reinstating direct pieces of work. It was really, really pleasing to see that feedback. And the social work manager said that the supervising team were just brilliant in preparing for the contact. Okay. So Jay, aged 9, had his first family time with his mum on the 15th of June. He'd not seen his mum for nearly 14 weeks. Can you imagine? Initially due to her being sectioned under the Mental Health Act, and then due to lockdown. It was considered to be an exception in phase 1, using the matrix, because of the worries he had about his mum and her health, and how his mum's health was being impacted by not seeing him. So prior to family time taking place, the social worker did a really good piece of work with Jay and mum, so that they knew what to expect in terms of following government guidelines. They talked through washing hands, what they could and couldn't do, and we shared some words and pictures to explain why he'd not seen his mum and what we're going to try to do to make that happen. Okay. So the family time supervising team were brilliant in preparing for this, and we considered both outdoor preferable and also indoor at the Children's Centre in Northampton. And if the weather was bad, we had plans for him to take his own toys and books, so that we didn't touch any of the toys in the family centre. He learnt at school about washing his hands and taking hand gel, so this was nice and easy for him. The carers have been wonderfully supportive the whole process, and they understood not only the importance of ensuring that he had the opportunity to see his mum, but also to promote the guidelines. And we worked with them to ensure that the daily routine of picking him up from school wasn't disrupted. And they also thought about making sure he didn't spend time in anyone else's car. So the foster carer actually took him to see his mum, which was brilliant. And the children and family support worker collected him from school and walked to the family centre where mum was waiting. Jay was really excited to see his mum, and they hugged after asking if it was okay. They went to the park, and everyone was really good at using hand sanitizer before and after using the play equipment. So this is Jay's words and pictures. I can hardly read it. Jay lives with his foster carers, M and A, and every Monday, Wednesday and Friday, Jay speaks to his mum on the phone because of a virus. Some people call the virus COVID. And this is why Jay can't see his mum and dad at the minute. Jay's social worker, Sue, has said it's okay for him to see his mum face to face in the next 2 weeks, as long as they're careful and we all wash our hands. Jay must wash his hands when he enters the family centre and when he gets home, and Sue will be asking Jay's mum to do the same, so we can all make sure we clean our hands and don't spread any germs. Jay's really excited about seeing his mum, and understands that whilst this will be good to spend time together, we still have to be very careful. So we wanted to listen to what families, foster carers and young people told us about virtual family time, and so we undertook to do a review. And our North Yorkshire's Voice carried out some focused review work exploring those views, and staff were also spoken to as part of this. Okay. So I've been supported, some of the quotes, I've been supported by my key worker to access family time as normal. Everything has worked, no issues, just fits in with my lifestyle. The children have family time weekly, which has worked fine, but they're ready to see friends, and family face to face now, as they're missing everyone. Family time was really hard work. Couldn't access invitations sent via email. We had to connect 3 separate video links for his family to join us, and it seemed clunky and uncoordinated. Poor signals for the time. 2 hours for very minimal speaking. I felt it would be good to use a different system other than Skype, which is much more user-friendly. Even as someone who's computer literate, this is hard work, but as the travel is usually a nightmare when we meet face to face, this is a good alternative from a foster carer. So virtual and video family time was seen as a good alternative where face-to-face wasn't possible. A blended approach is preferred as we move forward. Virtual family time has provided for increased flexibility. Travel time and associated cost savings have been incredible. Older young people have said that they prefer virtual engagement in general. And younger people said they especially miss family time face-to-face. There were some privacy and home safety concerns from foster carers using the virtual approaches, and some parents weren't prioritising family time that was virtual as much as face-to-face. There was a general dissatisfaction with our Skype platform. We have just now got Microsoft termed as a result of that. And issues with access to competency with technology. I can't read that because somebody's technology and digital exclusion. Okay, that's the end of my session. I can see some questions popped up, but I don't know.
Great. I just before I stop sharing the screen, just to say that if you want to read more about the research, that's on the Nuffield Family Justice Observatory website. Thank you so much for that, Vicky. It's really great for you to explain how it works in practice.
Incredibly complex.
Yes, yeah, I can really tell. Okay, so yeah, has the research been published yet? Somebody asked. Yes, it's all on the Family Justice Observatory website. I'll put the link in the chat in a minute if I can. And a question from Holly. I'm curious about whether you have a sense of the impact of face-to-face contact going ahead, where social distancing is expected to happen, i.e. where children and parents see one another but can't hug or have to wear masks or stay apart. Yeah, I was wondering that, and somebody was tweeting about that this morning. Do you want to answer that one, Vicky?
Yeah, and it is a move. It's tricky. So we have provided everybody now with a face covering. Not masks because it's not PPE, but we're encouraging, we've got a risk assessment process in place. So before any family time takes place, the person that's responsible for facilitating that will phone the parent and make sure that they've got a face covering. The same for the worker, and if the young person's aged 11 or under, then they won't wear one. We can't tell them not to hug, it's just an impossibility. And actually, when you look at the fact that children who are living between households can see both their parents, that wouldn't feel the right thing to do. But where possible, we're trying to reduce that. Most children now have an understanding about that, and obviously the workers are making sure that they maintain the social distancing.
Okay, thank you, Vicky. Is there any other questions or comments? Anything anybody'd like to contribute or hear more about? So, Angela, oh, it's great you're here, Angela. You're going to feed that back into your group. Good. Excellent.
Hi, Vicky. Sorry, I don't know if you can hear me. Hi, I'm Sally. I'm from the team manager for the Family Time Service in Lincolnshire.
Hiya.
I think I don't know, did we meet previously? I'm not sure. We did have a visit from Northamptonshire. I'm from North Yorkshire. North Yorkshire, sorry. One of my questions is, we're receiving a lot of pressure from the courts to increase levels of family time, and we're now being sort of ordered to deliver, which is a bit of a challenge because obviously we're working very similar to the way that you are currently, and we're offering reduced levels of contact so that we can manage it, so we're COVID compliant really. So we're cleaning down sort of rooms after every usage. We've got reduced sort of families sort of coming in at any one time. staggered start times. And are you under the same pressure from the courts currently?
Not at all. And interestingly, we had to convince judges and CAFCAS that reinstating family time was the right thing to do. They were not in agreement with that approach and didn't want us to do that. Our AD does have a fairly regular meeting with our judiciary, and they are well aware of our approach. They don't talk about, they won't let us talk, they won't let us say it's family time. They still refer to it as court in that arena. But no, they've not pushed us at all, not at all with this.
Oh, that's very very interesting, because that's sort of a very different experience to what we're sort of having in Lincolnshire currently. And obviously we're reviewing all cases on a case-by-case sort of basis and what meets the needs of the children. But obviously the challenge is managing that sort of the levels of increasing contact.
Not at all. We haven't been under that pressure. Probably whilst I've just seen a question about the IRO service, I haven't included that at all in this presentation. Judy, good point to raise. I suppose it was a little bit different, because usually any changes to face-to-face family time would only be made in a LAC review. This was an unprecedented set of circumstances. However, the IROs are very visible with children's care planning, and decisions in relation to family time would be run past the IROs, so that there was a clear and agreed approach to how that would be united. And then I'm just looking at a question from Jane. Who's that question to, Jane?
Beth? Oh, yes. About some children feeling unsafe when they're seeing their parents. Yes, I mean, I think if children, it had in some cases revealed some of the fears and difficulties that children had seeing their parents face to face. And, some social workers and foster carers were saying, actually, there are some children who want to keep that link with their family, but they feel safer doing it online. So I think we do, again, need that individual approach. We should really be listening to children's voices. Sometimes I think it's hard for children to say exactly what they're thinking and feeling about seeing their birth family. And sometimes their feelings are really, really mixed. So it is difficult, but it's really important to listen to children, and not just what they say, but also sometimes, how they're behaving and what's their behavior like after contact and things, so that we do get it right for them. And I think, one thing we have learned is that the virtual methods, it's another one in a range of options for children to stay in touch with their families.
Yeah. And then I can just see a question from Holly. Do you have a contingency plan in place for changing plans? Yeah, I mean, at the minute we're in Tier 1 in North Yorkshire, but the complicating factor for us is that we, surrounding us, have a range of other local authorities that are in Tier 2, such as York, Leeds, Middlesbrough. We're right in the middle of that. So we have contingency plans. We have daily pandemic management group meetings with managers, and then heads of service and the AD come together every single day at 3:30 till 4:30 to consider anything associated to practice, which includes continuation of direct visits, changes to family time, and we have that working group in relation to family time, which is just down again, but if there's a change to our tier, then that will be reinstated to consider what our approach is. It's difficult to predict. It's a day-by-day discussion, really, at the minute.
Yeah. Any further questions or comments anybody'd like to make? I don't know if this fits with what people are doing in your areas, or if you've taken a different approach you want to talk about. mean, one question I had, Vicky, was about what about the foster carers who are shielding and who are really, you know, resistant? Have you found ways around that?
Yeah, so we had a little bit of that at the beginning, and we haven't at the minute got anyone shielding. And it's been, we have a practice model in this North Yorkshire, which is around kind of working alongside and with and not doing to and at. And so we've tried to, what we've tried to do is just work and talk the issues through with carers and make things as safe as we can. We haven't really, we haven't had anybody saying they can't go and have family time with their families. We've been able to use the clear guidance from Public Health England to assure them of you know, the approach.
Yeah, I think maybe because you've got such a careful, planned approach, that was reassuring for them.
I think so. I mean, it wasn't without its complexities, like I say, and you know, at the minute it feels like we're heading back down that route again. But I think the openness and transparency of the service and allowing those question and answer sessions has really helped move our service on. And you know, similarly, we do the same with our foster carers if that's felt that we need to do that.
Yeah, thank you. Ellen's put a comment about some parents have found it positive to get into an insight into where their children are placed. And yes, I think that's something else that the contact during the pandemic has kind of revealed, that it, you know, it became apparent that in a lot of cases there was very little connection between the foster home and the birth family home, the family home. So, you know, children were being taken to contact by their social worker and having family time with their parents in a contact centre. And the foster carer and the birth parent, I should say parent really, because I'm so used to talking about adoption, the parent didn't really have much connection. The parent didn't really know what the child's life was like in the foster home. So sometimes they really appreciated being able to, you know, kids showing them around their bedroom or doing a little dance for them around the garden and things. They liked that feeling of being connected to the child's world. And some of the foster carers said they liked being able to see the birth parents' home, the parents' home. I need to sort myself out about parents and birth parents. Do you feel adopted children didn't take place due to adults being risk averse? Do you have plans to explore this part, particularly for siblings? Well, I think this is an ongoing area of work that I'm very involved in, and that also the Nuffield Family Justice Observatory are very involved in, is you know, we need to take a look at what's happening for kids who are adopted, because this study that I did, where we looked across kinship care, children in care and children who'd left care to be adopted, it was very, very stark how differently the adopted kids were treated. And you could see it from the parents' point of view, because some of the parents had one of their kids was in care, one of their kids was in kinship care, and one of their kids was adopted. And, you know, their child who's adopted, they had no prospect of seeing again in the near future. But the parents the same, the children are coming into care for the same reasons. They're just coming in at different ages, but they get treated very, very differently. So if kids in care need that connection, if it's important for them, for their identity to see their parents and their brothers and sisters, why do we have such a different approach in adoption? So I think that is something we need to have a conversation about. Certainly something I'm talking about a lot, and the Family Justice Observatory is wanting to have a conversation about. So one of the other projects that they're working on now that I mentioned earlier is a project looking around alternatives to letterbox in adoption. Possibly can we use some technology to help adopted kids stay in touch with people in their families as well? And definitely the siblings issue. I think we need to really prioritise. If we feel a child is heading to adoption and we feel it will benefit them to stay in touch with their siblings, we need to set that as a priority when we are recruiting adoptive parents, and not look for people who will consider that, but look for people who feel really positive about doing that for that child.
Right.
Okay, we got 3 minutes to go. So G. Charlton, sorry, I don't know what your name is. Well, it's great you're doing some research around that. You know, feel free to drop me an email or anything once your research gets underway. There's always more to be learned about these things. Yes, family, yeah, Angela, you'd be interested to hear more about the FGA work as you're working with a family of siblings who've got no farewell family time and no contact planned. That's depressing, isn't it? That is really depressing, and thinking very short term about children's needs. You know, we know those connections are really important. I say everything the Family Justice Observatory is doing are on their website, and so do take a look there, or get in touch with me, Angela, if I can be helpful in relation to that. Okay, so we're going to finish off now. So if there's no final questions, any final point you want to say, Vicky?
No, thank you for having me.
Yeah, well, thank you so much. I'm so glad you could do this with me. It's really great to hear about what you're doing, and that really carefully, thoughtful, planned, proactive approach, and involving everybody. That's what I was most impressed about. I hadn't thought about the unions, but of course, like at the uni, we're talking about going back to face-to-face teaching. Of course, the unions are involved. Of course, the staff have to have their say. So it's really useful to hear about your approach. So thank you very much. And thank you everybody who came along to the session. And I say we have uploaded our presentation onto the FabChange website, and we have uploaded the research reports, but you can also get those either from my page at the university or the Family Justice Observatory page. So thank you very much for coming.